Welcome to Community, a podcast where we seek unity and diversity. My name is Carey Bailey, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this fabulous space. In this community, we seek harmony by listening to understand. We celebrate our differences as an opportunity to expand our own perspectives. Today, I am privileged to be sitting down with Kathy Tilque, former CEO of the Gilbert Chamber of Commerce, former town council member, and current president of an exciting new project here in Gilbert, the Gilbert Advocacy Center Foundation, a center to assist victims of violence when they come to report crime, and then on through the judicial system and through the healing process. It's estimated that the center will be opening in December of 2026, right in the heart of downtown Gilbert. This is Kathy's second time in our chair, and I understand that we have her scheduled for at least one more visit with Jessica Nicely to further explore the motivations behind and the anticipated resource that this Gilbert Advocacy Center will be for our community. So Kathy, thank you so much for your service that you have and that you continue to provide for our community. And thank you for making time to sit down for yet another visit with us here on Community.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for asking me. I feel like we have a lot of information to share with our community so that they know we'll be providing a safe environment for victims of violence now and into the future.
Wow, what a resource. When I learned about this new project that you're heading up, I was really anxious to sit down with you to share some of my own family story and then to explore this timely and much needed project with you. So my hope is that today's conversation will serve to open the perspective of our listeners who may not have had firsthand experience with violent crime, as well as provide some hope and community for those who have. The reality is that when we live in a community, all of us are impacted when one of us is impacted. So I'd love to share our story, my family's story, and then see your vision for how this new center might support and fill in some of the gaps in a situation like ours.
That'd be perfect.
Sound good?
It does. Thank you.
So on the night of November 18th, 2023, our then 16-year-old son came home from a night out with friends. He had gone to a bonfire with a group of friends, and I remember at 9:55 that night, he texted me saying, Mom, we're done. Like, this is lame. We're going to go ahead and head home. I should be home by 10:30. And about 10 minutes later, I received another text from him saying, I'm not going to be home by 10:30. I'll come in and wake you up when I get home. And I said, okay, sounds great. So fast forward a couple of hours and he came in. So at this point, it's probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And he touched me, and it was one of those like trembling electric touches that I woke up and I knew that something was wrong. And through a trembling voice, he said, Mom, I just got jumped. And this was 3 weeks following the death of Preston Lord and a 2 to 3 year stint of teen violence in our community. It was a time, I think, of great anxiety for all parents of teenagers in our community. We had had many conversations with our son and our daughter, who's just a little younger than him, about being careful, being wise with where you're going, being aware of who you're around. And like any typical 16-year-old, he's like, Mom, I'm fine. I'll be fine. It's good. And that all came crashing down on that night of November 18th. I got out of bed and followed him back to his room. I remember just trembling and the anxiety that was in my body that was making me physically sick to my stomach as I came into his room with him. And he shared with me that as he and his friend were walking back to their car away from the crowd of the party, there was a group of young men and young women who followed them, and the chief antagonist began yelling at him and shouting racial slurs at him and asking him if he was a blood because of the colors that he was wearing that night. And my son turned around and saw a group of about 15 boys pressing him. And he immediately began pumping his hands and just saying, "You guys, I'm just trying to leave. No, I'm not a blood. I'm just trying to leave." And it began to escalate, and just the terror that filled his mind as he became very quickly aware that he was in a situation really similar to the situation that had just taken the life of Preston Lord 3 weeks earlier. He knew he was about to get jumped. And his friend who he was with took off running to go and call the police. And my son, who was he had gone thrifting that morning with his sister and had this new pair of shoes on that didn't fit him very well. And it was just a bad set of circumstances, and he couldn't run. And he was assaulted by a young man who was convicted in another one of the assaults associated with the Gilbert goons, and then dragged and held down as the rest of the crowd piled on. And my son went into fetal position, just trying to protect his head and his vital organs, I guess. Eventually, one of the hardest things about this was, as this was happening, he could hear the girls laughing and mocking him, mimicking his screams, and just participating in the terrorizing of my son. There was a slight break in the frenzy, and in this moment, friends who had realized what was happening and had come that way from the bonfire, one of them grabbed him by his hoodie and pulled him up to standing and began just trying to calm down the crowd. And my son at this point ran and got into his car. And we are just so grateful for those friends who had the courage to step in and to help in that moment. So he sat in the car, and this is when he texted me saying, "Mom, I'm not going to be home by 10:30. And they waited for the police to come as my son's heart was just racing. He initially drove off, but then realized that he was his friend's ride home who had taken off when the assault happened. And so he circled back for this friend to give him a ride, and the police came and took a report on what had happened and never called us to let us know what had happened to our 16-year-old son that night. So I guess that night I was just overwhelmed with the complete soul experience that it was learning this and watching my son have this experience, seeing all of the different levels of trauma, from the humiliation to the physical pain and fear and terror and so on and so forth. But eventually he was like, "Mom, my adrenaline is crashing. I'm ready to go to bed." And I went out in the kitchen and just stared out into my little chicken yard, watching my chickens for the rest of the night, just sitting there kind of dazed and confused. And my sweet husband, he had not gotten any sleep the night before. And so in that moment that my son pulled me out of my bed, I made that split-second decision to not wake my husband up. And that is one of those decisions that I question, should I have gotten him? Should I have not? But the next morning when my husband woke up, I shared with him what had happened, and we knew immediately that we would be pressing charges. I don't think anybody had brought charges yet against any of these young men, and we just felt like a young man has lost his life to this, and it is time that a stand is made against this violence in our community. So we gave our son a little bit of time, but that afternoon we let him know we are going to be pressing charges. And I think this is probably, you would be able to speak to this I'm sure. But when we told our son we are going to be pressing charges, he was like, no, nobody can know. Like, he didn't even want us to tell his siblings that this had happened. He was so embarrassed and felt emasculated and just shame and fear and all of these things. Is that a pretty typical response, have you found?
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that all of those combined feelings that your son was having are what victims have all the time. And it really is the core of why these acts of violence aren't reported. Because I'm sure in his case, he didn't want people at school to know.
Yes.
He didn't want his family to know, let alone strangers and people at school. And teen years are always so emotional, and there's a lot of mean kids out there. And unfortunately, it's their own insecurities that are causing that, which is a whole different topic of mental health and different things. But the fact that they act out to other people now has pulled that innocent young man into their realm of violence. And it's an act that doesn't go away. That feeling of being vulnerable and shamed and humiliated stays with that victim for a very long time. First, I want to say how brave you and your husband and your son are for coming forward. During that time when we were getting stories about the goons, and I will just talk from a former council member, we weren't getting any evidence. And people don't understand that you can't make arrest on say-sos, on, I saw somebody, but I don't have any proof.
Right.
And so that really created even more angst within our community, because I totally understand. I want these people to be held accountable.
Yes.
And the fact that people weren't coming forward, and there were so many parents who refused to share videos. They didn't want their children involved, even though they were a witness.
Yes.
For the same reason.
For sure.
That they would be ridiculed, that they would be humiliated, that they, would be ostracized.
Yes.
By coming forward. So I share that because it makes your bravery even more powerful in my mind. And I believe when we talked before that this incident happened in Pinal County, which created even more layers.
Difficulty as Gilbert residents, right?
Yes, and so one of the things, as we, in hindsight, as you look at that, we have really stepped up our police departments working together.
Yes.
Even more so than they had in the past. And I think, you put processes in place, but when these ugly things don't happen, you're not always prepared right away. Correct. As you should be. And so I believe that, not that there's a silver lining in any of this, but it has raised an awareness internally and externally, as residents, as fellow citizens, as fellow human beings. We need to be brave enough to stand up for our neighbors. And I know that you chose to be a little more quiet about this during the process, to report the crime, press charges. But a lot of people didn't know what you were going through.
No.
And I'm sure part of that was, there was that shame and that humiliation that you didn't want for your son. I think you were ready to take it on, because I know you and I can tell our mama bears when it comes to our family. And so, we would do whatever we needed to do. But to try to balance the needs of your son and your family and yourself. I don't want to ever forget that, because sometimes as moms, we're so busy taking care of everybody else, we forget what's happening internally to us, especially when your child's hurt.
For sure.
And to make it public. I believe that because of the amount of recognition of teen violence in our community, your case moved a lot faster than maybe it would have.
For sure. Can we talk about that for just a second?
Yeah.
So when we initially approached our son and told him, and he was just like, no. And we just said to him, a young man is dead, and you have the opportunity to step up and prevent this from happening again to another, because it will continue to go on as it has. And it was just so crazy how the videos, how effectively they were able to circulate these videos just among themselves. And we told Brigham, because he knew that it had been videoed. He saw people, he could see the flashlights as he's on the ground, fearing for his life. And so he decided to go back to school. This was a Saturday night. He decided to go back to school a week later. It was the week of Thanksgiving. And so he just took that full week off and then went back to school that following Monday. And we told him job number one is trying to get your hands on that video, because he had had friends who had had people come up to them and show them the video of his assault on their devices, but they weren't sending it outside of their tight-knit group. So he, by the grace of God, on that Monday was able, there was a young man who had it, who agreed to send it to him. And so we had that video, and a month later that ended up being there were a couple of videos that all kind of broke out into the public all at the same time. And his was one of those, which was a whole nother layer of victimization, right? Because everybody was talking about it. And AZ Central, I think, was the first news organization that broke that video. They did blur his face, but it was like wildfire among all of the teenagers. And so at school, he was inundated with people saying, is that you in that video getting beat up? And it was just so crazy. So with the trying to get some help from the police department, that was one of the surprises for me in this whole experience, was just how difficult it was to get the ball rolling. And it was, the holiday season, and the responding officer was trying to use up all of his PTO from the year. So he wasn't there. And so it was so much more difficult than I was expecting. But because of the breaking in the press and just all of the public outcry over this, I had actually, at our lawyer's advisement, she had advised that we share the video with the Gilbert PD in addition to Pinal, just because we live in this jurisdiction. And it was the next day that the sergeant in Pinal County called and said that he had been getting calls from Gilbert PD that day and was like, what the heck is this video? And we were like, we've been trying to share this with you, right? So it started to move, and it ended up being a blessing for our family that there was such community outcry and spotlight on this, because it just helped with moving things along with the police department. And we ended up having 2 convictions in May of 2024, which, like you were saying, that's remarkably fast. Mm-hmm. So for the sake of this discussion, I would love just to know, in that situation, because Pinal County actually did have a victims advocacy center that we were given the phone number of right away. But when we called them, they said, actually, we can't do anything for you until the prosecutors have agreed to take on this case and to press charges. And so there's this whole limbo that a family or a victim that's in that situation falls into, a gap, to use your words, right? Right. Talk to me about, let's say that this happened in January of 2027, a month after the Gilbert Advocacy Center has opened. What would be the process that you would say, ideally, here's how you would maximize taking advantage of the resource that this center is going to be for the community?
So first, I just want to clarify that I'm not an expert in the judicial process.
Okay.
And I still have a lot to learn. I'm going to share my vision.
Perfect.
And hopefully I'll have a lot of influence as time goes on. But
Yes.
in a case like this, typically the police officer would have come to you and then taken you down to our advocacy center to do the report and all of that. Or you could have come in and reported it there. Okay, one or the other.
Yes.
What we're looking at doing is a multidisciplinary team concept. So we want you to go through the judicial process to ensure that you get the result as you did.
Yes.
And in order to do that, there's a lot of rules and regulations that we have to follow to make sure that your prosecutor has the information they need so that somebody doesn't walk.
Yes.
Because of something that didn't happen correctly.
Right.
And I honor that. I 100% honor that. My vision is for you and your family. What does that look like when you walk into that advocacy center? So that multidisciplinary team coordinator will ensure that a family advocate would be assigned to you as soon as this happens. And they would be with you so that you would understand that when you talk to the detective, it's my understanding that they're going to have to talk to your son by himself.
Sure.
And they do that on purpose, and I understand
Yes.
why. But this advocate will be helping you understand why and what they're going to be talking about. An advocate could be sitting in there with your son, so he would understand what the questions mean and what's going on. That advocate would still be able to follow you through the different steps so that they could help you understand what to expect next. And so some of these things will take longer, but they will if there has to be a medical exam,
Yes.
that will take place on site during this time. We would have counselors available so that they can start talking to you right away, you and your family, and try to understand what is the best course of action for it to help you get through this.
Yes.
Meanwhile, all of this other stuff that you felt disconnected from is still happening, but you would be understanding what that process is and what to expect next.
Yes.
And so it's more than just reporting a crime and waiting. In my mind, it's also that wraparound services for your son and for your family as you go through this.
Oh, I love that. Is this center going to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or what are you thinking the hours are going to look like?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
So some of that's going to be budget-wise.
Sure.
And so I'm sure we will have regular hours to begin, but as we move forward, I could see that 24 hours.
Yeah.
Now, having access to that family advocate, whether you're at the center or not, should still be part of what's going to happen right away.
Yeah.
And we have crisis response teams now that can go out to the scene, and they have contacts with counselors that can go with them. So if they have to go to a victim's home,
Yes.
and if the crime happened there, and you know how the family is still there, that advocate and that counselor can help maneuver that process as the police are doing their job and what they need to do. And so some of this is already in the works, and we've got some of that going without the center.
Okay.
So the center will be that safe environment of where you can go, meet with the detectives, meet with your family advocate, meet with your counselors, whatever it is, all in one spot.
I just imagine how that could have just helped to wrap us up in support and to just help us, because I was sharing with you before we started recording, like, I'm a grown woman. I've had friends and family members who have been through difficult things, and I watch the news and TV dramas that illustrate these types of things, and I think I had an idea in my head of how I thought I would feel or respond in this type of a situation, and I was just sideswiped by the reality of what that feels like. And the thought of having a place that is safe, that has kind of everything that you need all in one place, that is confidential, that kind of can just help you know what to even do next. Because even knowing what phone number do I call, like we knew where this had happened generally, but I was on the phone with Pinal County and then with Queen Creek trying to figure out whose jurisdiction was this. Like it was just, I just wasn't prepared for the difficulty of even figuring that part out. And just the thought of creating a community resource that can take some of that burden, lift a little bit of that piece of the burden, because the rest of the burden is, it's overwhelming, that you're just going to be dealing with.
It is. And I think we talked a little bit about how your mind goes blank.
Yes.
Because you never thought that this would happen to you.
Right. Even though you know that of course it could happen to you, but then it's happening and you're like, what do I do?
Yeah, I don't know what to do. Do I call the police? Who do I call? What do I do? You know, all of that. And part of the foundation's goal will be, how do we raise the awareness? How do we get you that one number?
Yeah.
If it's 911, if that's the number it needs to be, then that's what it is.
Yes.
But how do we create awareness for families, for teens, for senior citizens, everybody who could be a victim, that they feel comfortable calling that number? And my most important part of this is we answer the phone.
Yes.
We answer the phone. You walk in the door, we're going to assist you, and you know we're going to help you through that. You're not alone.
Yes.
And I think it's so important. And you don't know what to do for your son at that point.
Mm-mm.
You know, the family members of victims, you feel so helpless.
Very helpless, because they're having this kind of unraveling experience that you know there is nothing you can do to stop that trauma that you are just watching play out in front of your eyes. It is.
One of the things about the center is we actually use trauma-informed designers. So the center, everything in this center is intentional to help the victim be able to remain calm and feel safe.
Yes.
And that is so key, as you can imagine, as you're going through this. If, I wish I could say it was 24 hours and you could have gone at 1 o'clock in the morning and done this. Hopefully it will be someday. But even if you could have gone the next morning, when you had time as a family to get your arms around what are we dealing with. The center will be a safe environment. One of the things we talked a little bit about was during this teen violence, how people weren't comfortable sharing evidence because they didn't feel it could be anonymous. They didn't feel
fear of retaliation was real and justified.
Yes. And so we want people to know if they come to our center and they provide us this information, it's safe to do so. And I think if people would have felt safe so much earlier, we could have gotten ahead of this.
Seriously.
And as a community, it falls on all of us. And it's so disheartening to think that anybody in our community, especially our teens that can't just go out and have fun, that something would happen to them. And so we are going to be very focused to make sure that when some bad happens, we just know that.
Yes.
Bad will happen even in Gilbert, Arizona.
For sure.
We have close to 100,000 kids in our community because we have big families here.
Sure.
And that's a third of our population.
Wow.
For whatever reason, we've allowed 50 to maybe 100 kids in this community define who we are, and that is not who we are.
Right.
We have so many amazing things going on, and so we want to try to get ahead of this. Some of what the Advocacy Center is about is after the crime. Long term, I want this to be about preventing those crimes too.
For sure.
And it's going to take a little while to get there.
For sure.
But by raising the awareness within our community, we can help eliminate this type of senseless violence.
For sure.
For all of our community, all ages.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I appreciate that so much. I even think about the families of some of these teens who were participating in the violence, and just like this last Christmas, I couldn't help but think about some of these families who know that they've got trials coming up for their sons in the Preston Lord case, which currently is scheduled for the end of July of 2025, but we'll see when it actually ends up happening. But just the victimization that happens, it just is like shrapnel that shoots out in all of these directions. And you have the people who are the apparent victims, and then you have those that are parents scratching their heads saying, how did this how did our son do this, right? And I just, my heart is with them also. When you talked about accountability, my husband and I, on writing our victim impact statement that we were able to read in court at the prosecution and ultimately the conviction of one of the young men in our son's case, we felt so strongly that accountability was needed. And I would love just to read a little bit of this, because for us at least, accountability wasn't about revenge. And there certainly were pieces, I think, inside of all of us that wanted there to be just that you did this wrong thing, and we want there to be a payment. But it was about so much more than that. My husband and I, we wrote, accountability is what is needed to assure law-abiding citizens that local authorities take the peace of their community seriously. It is what is needed to assure them that they and their loved ones can safely enjoy public spaces and gatherings. Accountability is also what is needed to assure those who would victimize others that this behavior will not be tolerated in our community, that there is a price that will be paid if you injure others for your own entertainment, that we take seriously the rights of our citizens to enjoy life, liberty, and to pursue happiness. This message must be made clear, and it begins with accountability here in this court today. Accountability also serves as an opportunity for the perpetrators, I'll leave the names out, to recognize and take ownership of the wrong they have done. It serves as a potential starting point for this perpetrator to change his ways, which we genuinely hope he will take. He does not have to continue down the path of terrorizing and victimizing those around him. He can use this as a time of accountability to wake up. We hope that he will receive and make the most of this opportunity. Whether he will or won't lies squarely on his shoulders. Only he can decide. And for our family at least, that was what the goal with accountability, and being so convicted that we will see this through to accountability, was for law-abiding citizens, for peace of mind, for those who are thinking about, maybe I want to jump on this bandwagon and go out and be in a viral video hurting others, or for the people who actually had done it, just serving as an opportunity for a wake-up call. What are your thoughts around, like, this has just become such a passion for you and such a mission in your life, helping victims through this process of seeing things through to accountability. What role do you feel like accountability plays in the healing process for those who are victimized?
You know, it's interesting. It's a key component, which is why the judicial system and process is part of the Advocacy Center. Because At the end of the day, somebody needs to be held accountable for their actions. I've always been very victim-centric. And it was interesting, a couple of years ago at a council retreat, we did a kind of a role play type of activity in regards to violence. In this case, I think it was domestic violence. Sure. And so you pick cards, and then you would go to different stages, and you would learn about programs that were available, and then you'd make a decision, and based on that decision, you picked another card, and you didn't know till the end what the outcome was. There was accountability. Some people didn't survive.
Sure.
Some moved on with their lives. There were all these different things, and it was really an eye-opener. We have a domestic violence courtroom in Gilbert, and I met our Judge Ferrante, and she's an amazing woman.
Sure.
And what she did is she made me realize, as a survivor, victim-centric is very, very important to me. And I never really thought about the person that was committing
Sure.
the crime. And she talked about court mandates and different things that these abusers have to go through. In her court, they have all of these things to be accountable. And at the end, what she did is she created a wooden coin. It's like if you went through different, I think AA has a coin or something at the end. So when you're done, you get this coin. And so when these abusers go through their mandated counseling, all of these things, they get that. And I got to sit in court and watch, which is very, very hard for me, as you can imagine. But she said that they are very proud to have earned this.
Sure.
And she says, I give this to you, and you carry it with you. So the next time you get in a situation, think about what you've learned. And it kind of just took me back a little bit. Because, again, I'm seeing it from only one side.
Sure.
And very passionate about it. But what I realize is, if there is some accountability, hopefully we can get accountability in earlier when these people who are prone to violence, that they would get some treatment sooner,
Sure.
if not afterwards. But if we're ever going to break a cycle,
Yes.
we have to have a compassion in us, similar to what your statement said, is they need to be held accountable. But let's help them
Yes.
not do this ever again,
Yes.
or get rid of those feelings of why they had to do that. And it's so hard. Even saying it to me saying it out loud, it's hard because you want them to pay in so many ways, but yet is it best for all the victims
Yes.
and their families and everybody? And isn't it better to help somebody move on and become a better person than throwing somebody in jail for the rest of their lives,
Right.
or whatever,
Right.
And I don't know the answer. I wish
No,
I did.
it's
And
complicated.
It's so complicated, but if there's a way that's part of why the counseling's so important.
Sure.
For the family. These kids who witness violence within their family have a great chance of violence
Sure.
in their future. And so if we can help them get beyond that early on, then we
Sure.
break the cycle. Hopefully that abuser will get the treatment they need as well.
Yes.
It's not going to be my focus. Obviously, I'm going to stay in my lane.
Victim-centric.
Very much so.
Yes.
But I also think it's important to have that understanding that there are people out there helping those people too.
Very
and
good.
I think that's great. But this is where I will be. One of the things that I think would be very helpful, when we went to Texas, we visited a children's crisis center, and it was an advocacy center for them. And what we learned is they actually have a foundation, so our foundation could help do this. I've talked with our courts, and they're willing to help us with this.
Beautiful.
But before that child or your son would have had to go to court and sit in that witness stand, they have a program where they bring all the kids in. Our foundation board could serve as the jury. We would have 2 volunteers that are actual attorneys and a judge. And the parents go in a different room. They get taught about what to expect when they go to court. The kids come in and they understand what each of the roles are and how your attorney is going to help you along. The other attorney is going to push back on you. And in this case, the children go and they sit and they get asked questions like, who's your favorite superhero? What's your favorite superhero movie? Things like that. Nothing about their case. And then they go through the process. And so when that other attorney pushes back and says, that's not mine, and so you must be wrong, or whatever the case may be, that child defends their position. And now they feel very comfortable when they go in, knowing what everybody's role is and what to expect. What they have to do is still going to be terrifying. I don't want to take away any of that. But knowing what is before them makes it so much easier. And to have a family advocate in that audience with you is so, so important. And so I see that as a role of this center as well.
I love that, because for me anyway, I know what a defense attorney's role is. I know what their job is, and I'm grateful that we have a judicial system where we are allowed a vigorous defense, right? It's so important. But even knowing that, going into court and hearing the accusations that they were making against my son I was shocked at how huge the response was inside of me. I was so angry that they would say these things. And in my son's case, they said that he had hit a girl, and this is what had initiated it. And just for the record, it's interesting because they had a young woman who had, I'm going to say conspired, but I don't know the legal language. That might not be legal in my mind. She and the perpetrator conspired that this was going to be their story, and was that she had been hit, and this is why they attacked him. And apparently in one of the videos out there, towards the end of the assault, the perpetrator says to him, "That will teach you to ever hit a girl again." And my son was so baffled by, like, what are they even talking about? They came at me with all of these racial slurs and "are you a blood?" and all of this nonsensical stuff. And then that was where it ended. And when the detective was interviewing this young woman during the investigation, she made that claim that he had hit her. And the detective, we were just so grateful for, once the ball got moving, we are so grateful to the detective and the prosecutors that took our case for us. But the detective said that this young woman made that claim, and that the detective paused the recording and told her, "If you are lying to me, I will press charges against you as well. Would you like to amend your statement?" And then she hit record. And this young woman said, "Well, maybe it was after the assault started that, like, maybe his arm accidentally flew back and hit me." And the detective was like, "This is exactly what happened. And I don't even know that it was my son's arm that hit her, because he was in fetal position so quickly that she had gotten hit during the assault." And so this is the story that they took. And the whole point is, and you can even hear it in me needing to litigate this right now, is that I was just like, not only just no, but hell no. He was not responsible for what these young men did to him. Don't even with me, right? But I wonder how that experience might have been different had we had the opportunity to be walked through that. Because the prosecutors, they did tell us, they're going to say their job is to do this. But just hearing those specifics, I was just like, oh, my mama bear heart is about to go crazy on you people.
And you have to sit there and be quiet.
And you do. You sit
you have
and
to
you listen.
Honor the system.
And then you go home and you scream.
Yes. I can
right?
imagine. But
Just
even
so
with
rough.
all of that,
Yes.
you got the outcome.
We did.
Right.
And we recognize that our situation, there were so many little pieces that we were just so fortunate with. And it is just heartbreaking and overwhelming to consider just the sheer number of people who don't either have those resources, or there isn't the community spotlight on their situation, and the true aloneness. I just want to end with, you said in your sit down with my co-host Ben, and this just touched me so deeply. You said that your primary goal for this center is to ensure that no other victim is going to feel alone or silenced, or that nobody cares. Can you just talk to us just a little bit about that? Because really, that is what a victim needs. They just need some companionship, some support, and a voice, and to know that their case matters.
Right. I guess I would say from personal experience that I felt I had nowhere to go. I never reported a crime.
Wow.
And I went through this just on my own, and that feeling of isolation, and there's a shame and a humiliation, there's a worry about a reflection on your family, a reflection in your community. So I know what it feels like to be alone and to not have anywhere to really turn to, a place that would help me get through that. So that's my passion. And when I hear your story, it makes me feel that, yes, this is exactly what we need. Yes. This is a real life story that just happened.
Yes.
This isn't something that happened 35 years ago in my case. Times have changed. And if I can take anything out of those times, it's to be a champion for others and to know that we have a police chief, that this is top priority for him. He is very victim-centric. We have a great police force, first responders, all of that care.
Yes.
And even though the center is not open yet, we've put so many pieces in place to get us towards this goal.
Yes.
And I have a lot of work to do to make sure that awareness gets out there.
Yes.
I'll be raising funds to help with some of these programs because we're not going to be able to fund it all right away. So the quicker we raise those dollars to get those counselors in place, all of those additional family advocates that we need. And I hate to say we need them, but we do. The fact that a couple of years ago, because we were always a year or at least behind in stats, but 1,200 domestic violence cases.
Wow.
I think we had 500 violent cases. Keep in mind, those are the only ones that were reported.
Right.
And so it's not that we're an amazing community.
Yes.
We are a great place to raise a family.
Yes.
Just like every other community, there's bad people in there and bad things happen. And I don't believe that we're a mature community until we take a look at that and we say we're going to help those less fortunate.
Yes.
And so many times that has different meanings for people. But when you're at the most vulnerable stage and moment of your life, then you are less fortunate at that moment.
Yes.
And we need to be there to help you.
Yes.
And you should never feel alone.
Yes. You should never feel alone.
Right.
Okay, 2 final points that are just on my heart and my mind as I listen to you. When we were initially finding how difficult it was to get the ball rolling with the reporting, our lawyer, who we had reached out to for help, like, how do we get the ball rolling? She gave us this reminder that was just so helpful, and it was the people who are in the sheriff's department, or in Gilbert's case, in the police department. These are good people who have given their lives to public service because they want to make a difference. But the reality is that they are overwhelmed with crime, right? Mm-hmm. And so she said, on the night that your son was assaulted, there were probably 10 other equally awful calls that those sheriff's deputies went out on and situations that they responded to. So just be patient, be persistent. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. That was her advice to us. And that really just helped us frame it. And I, in no way, shape, or form, want to act like I know that I don't speak for all of the families that have been hurt and wounded. And we're all going to walk that road of grief and trauma differently. But at least for our family, we are so grateful for the efforts that were made in our community's behalf, in our family's behalf, and for the on-the-job training and adjusting that they were making as they started to work together across different police departments, and all of those changes that happened in real time, because it was clear that, okay, this has gotten way out of control. And just, so thank you to those for just the public servants who dedicate their lives to that. We just are so grateful for you. The closing note that I would love to end on is you shared a little bit of counsel, advice, really empathetic advice for those who find themselves in a situation where they are victimized and they are feeling trauma and all of the pain and the fear and all of those things that go into that. And I would love to just end with something that you found helpful. And you did share this in the last podcast, but I think it's worth revisiting and repeating. And for me, if I could give seasoned counsel, I would say be persistent in getting the help that your family needs in pursuing accountability. I would say be gentle with yourself and with your loved ones, and give yourself the time that you need to feel the trauma and to heal. Be patient with yourself. And then finally, to look outward and to see who you can help. For our family, I feel like those three things have been really helpful. And then I can't even believe I didn't say this first, but just tapping into faith, into your higher power for just some connection and grounding and perspective. What would you say?
Well, it's hard to follow that up,
Oh,
because
just
you said
add
it
to
just
it.
perfect.
Oh, perfect.
I love that you said give yourself grace,
Yeah.
because I think, again, we talked briefly about when it's you feel like as a victim, you can just carry on.
Yeah.
You can keep whatever in your life together. But once it's your kids,
Yeah.
it's hard. Then you shift. And it seems like we will take action when it's our family and those we love. But when it's ourselves, we think that we can just manage it and get through it. And perhaps we think we are saving our family. We're protecting our family, and we're willing to carry that burden. And so that's why I love that you say give yourself some grace. Allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, and know that you have to move out of it somehow. You have to find the courage and the strength, and it's in there. And I think what I mentioned last time was by helping others, by being kind to others, it gives you this feeling inside that helps create that courage and that strength that you've got in there. You just don't know it.
You don't
believe it, you know, and until you have to. You know, sometimes it gets to a point, the danger is so imminent that you don't have a choice. That's when you pick up in the middle of the night and you go. Other times, you can work your way through it in different circumstances. And so just create that strength by helping others. I just think it's so important, and it's simple. I have people asking me all the time, you know, oh, you do so much, you do this and all. I said, I don't really, but you do it every day because you're kind. You make people feel welcome. Make them feel important. And I don't think there's anything more important than that right now, especially in the world we live in. And your faith helps you with that.
Yes.
You know that through your faith, that it is about helping others.
I love that. Kathy Tilque, thank you so much for this really illuminating conversation today. You are just lovely, and I feel so lucky to have gotten to just sit down and share with you and to learn from you and to just feel with you some of these things. If our listeners want to help donate, is there a website that they can go to?
Yes, it's gilbertacf.org, so that stands for Advocacy Center Foundation. So it's gilbertacf.org. We are right now taking founding partners because it's so important that the community embraces this. So for $100, they can be listed as a founding partner of this effort forever. We're going to keep you up there, and businesses are $5,000, but individuals and their families are $100.
Wonderful. Well, I would like to pledge our family would love to be founding partners with you in this great, great work. Thank you so much for all that you do for our community.
Wow. Carey, thank you for being brave and for having this podcast. You and Ben are doing a great job, and I love the message that you're sharing. And if this helps even one person come forward,
yes,
and share what they're going through to get help, then it's worth it.
Even one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy.
For sure. Thank you.